Let's talk about taking a simple shape painted with oil paint, scanned or digitally drawn on a white background, and then extracted from the background and dropped onto a photo similar to this. This is the end goal. It's not meant to be a creative representation, but a functional one. But I'm going to show you this in real time. We're going to do something called luminosity masking. I have created a layer that's just for demonstration purposes only of a gradient of about from all the way from black all the way to white. What happens when we try going to the channels palette, hovering over the RGB, holding the command or control button, and clicking? It selects everything brighter than 50% gray. So what we've done is selected the upper brightness of luminosity. And you can continue to refine this. If you'll notice where the cursor is, if I hold Shift, Option, and then Command, it goes from a plus to an X, which means intersection. Don't know why, don't know what, haven't gotten that far into it yet. All I know is if I click again, it reduces the luminosity selection by half. Now we're in the top 75%. And I can continue clicking and it will continue refining quite a bit until I've gotten to the brightest highlights that I want. That's all the basics of luminosity masking is. So this is good for a first lesson. I'm going to go back to layers. I'm going to hide this. I'm going to take this colored background. I'm going to duplicate it, put it on top of this black background that I have here, just so you can see the results in real time. And now that I've selected this layer, I'm going to go back to the channels and I'm going to do that luminosity masking. Hovering over RGB, I'm going to hit Command, click, and it does a selection. But I know that it's only done everything that's brighter than 50% gray, so I'm missing some of the details there. So I'm going to hit Shift, Option, Command, and click again, and it's done another refinement. I'm going to stop here. I could go further. And one thing I want to observe is right now we've selected all of the whites. We haven't actually selected all of the reds, so we have to invert this selection. Now, when I hit Shift Command I or go to Select Inverse right here, it now has just the red shape selected. So when I'm looking back at the layers palette and I have the selection, I can go to the mask tool. I mask the layer, which hides all the other details, and suddenly we have the beginnings of the shape. We have to refine this a bit further because selections sometimes show some of the whites, some of the blacks, and the contrast. We can do this here, but ideally we should do this on the photo that we want. I'm going to move this aside. Let's shrink it in size. Oop. And on the layer, I'm going to drag that over here, and you'll see where it begins, and you'll see to the left where it's going to end. First thing I'm going to do is there are two things on this layer. I'm going to hide the other one. There is a mask, and then there is the layer with info on it. I want to refine the layer with info on it first by going to the levels, and here I'm actually affecting like how dark the exposure is. I'm going to bring that red down so it's a nice solid contrasty base image. And then I'm going to click on the mask using, again, the curves layer. I can tweak how quickly it cuts in on the edges, and I'll zoom in and show you this. So before, it had a white kind of ghost left over from the white background, and we're going to lose some of the texture, unfortunately, but as I drag the mask over, we begin to see, there we go, a transition that looks like a nice white watercolor / ink oil combination. And the reason I earlier did the contrast on the base layer was it took some of those transparent, translucent edges and gave them some density and solidity. While it might compromise the color, I can always fix that later, but now when I go back to the mask layer and I change the levels, I'm not going to lose as many of those fingers of the paintbrush. I'd probably go right to around here to get rid of all that white, and up here. You have to play with it really to get used to it. There we go. And that's it. We now have a fairly well close-cropped image. There are things you can do to play with the mask further. If you control-click on the mask, let's see what we get here. Mask options. That's not what I'm looking for. Is it under properties? Yes, properties. So I can do feathering of the mask, which I don't want to do. I can do density of the mask, which brings back some of the background. Those are not things I want. But I can go to select and mask, which is a new window that pops up in Photoshop CC. I'm not sure if it's in the older versions. I'm going to take the transparency all the way up. And I'm looking at something called an onion skin view, which basically has a transparency to it. And with this tool, there are brushes, and they allow us to go to the edges and refine our selections. See, before, after, not much going on there. What does this one do? Let's do a nice little feather. So that brings it back, and this one will hide it. And then bring a softness. Before, after. It's not showing much visible here because I think we've done a pretty good selection. But what it's supposed to do is find edges and get rid of those little ghostly edges that are still sticking around. But refining mask is like an enhanced part, and this is all different steps to bring this background in. Something I do suggest at the end is if you have a Wacom tablet and a good pencil nib brush, you can skip doing the painting and the scanning and just paint directly onto the photos themselves on a separate layer. And that might save you a lot of extra work. But this is the beginning of the Luminosity mask stuff to dropping shapes from a scan onto another photo.